This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. Joining me this week, Thing 1 and Thing 2, but they've grown up into a pair of responsible adults. Renee Rodriguez.
You know it.
And Kait Lamphere.
I don't know if I'm a responsible adult.
I mean, you're more responsible than Thing 1 and Thing 2. I'm glad that you guys are both here with me this week to talk about comic books. I'm super excited to do that. But before we get into it, I've got two things to throw out here. As a reminder, as we do every single year to everyone that's listened to this show long term, next month, for the month of July, we are on break. So for an entire month, all throughout July, you can expect a bunch of mini-sodes from various folks on the show, as well as an interview that I'm going to be doing. The other thing that I want to mention that is that at the end of this month, on June 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be doing a hangout as we usually do per month. We'll probably do one in July as well, so keep a lookout for that. But nonetheless, June 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard, we'll be hanging out with folks to just talk about comic books and just, chill. Maybe do some fun. Maybe play some games. Who knows? But before I start blathering too much about the potential opportunity of so much fun we can have together on the internet, let's get into this thing. Let me ask the legally mandated questions that I have every single week. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kait.
I've been good. My tiny little garden out back of my condo is loving this insane, very hot or raining weather. I am not loving it.
But you are not a plant.
Right. I read The Green River Killer, finally. I actually checked out this book a couple of months ago from the library, and then it was just sitting in my library books pile, and I eventually just turned it in because I had run through all of the automatic renewals and I just hadn't read it. So finally I saw it on Hoopla 4 days ago, and I was like, it's time to read this, and then I read it immediately.
Nice. I feel like going from, hey, I've got a nice garden, to I read The Green River Killer is such a 180 that I wasn't expecting from you today. So what did you think of this?
This is by Jeff Jensen and Jonathan Case, and I ended up enjoying the story. There's two different timelines in it that kind of flow in and out of one another. It's the timeline of Jeff Jensen's father being on the case trying to find the Green River Killer, and during that time in the 80s and 90s. And then it's also the story of fast forward to him catching the Green River Killer. But it's not like timeline 1 in the 80s and then timeline 2 in 2001. They're like interconnected. Anyway, so the reason that Jeff Jensen's father was on the case is because he had volunteered to be the computer guy that enters all of this data into the newfangled computer the department got in the 80s. So he was the guy that was familiar with all of these details and ended up being the only detective on this case for at least 10 years probably. So right. Oh man, that was rough for me to think about, because I have a job where I get the feeling of accomplishment that I finish a project a couple times a week. I can't imagine being on the same case for over a decade. And
right.
Just there's no movement in the case for a long time. The Green River Killer ended up being caught by DNA technology, pretty much. And then the dad retired the day that that the murderer was caught. He was like, yeah, I'm done now. And he came in as a consultant. Anyway, it was a very fun story to read. I feel like maybe I should have said spoilers, but at the same time, this is history, and also this book has been out for a while, and
and I think there's a lot more nuance to the book than you're getting into.
Right.
I remember when I read this, I think Nick recommended I read it because he's obsessed with true crime. And I remember just being floored by some of the interesting things that happened in the real world that the story tells. And I think you're glossing over a lot of the details intentionally, I think, to not give full spoilers of everything. But man, there's a lot of really interesting and super dark stuff in this book.
Right. And it was really focused on the creator's father and his father's experience with this case and with the murderer, interrogating him specifically more toward the end. And I get it. Like, I understand that that's the story that he wants to tell is the detective's side of the story, because that's what this creator was familiar with. But at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
this guy had at least 48 victims, and you hear maybe half a dozen of their names. And I
Yeah.
just feel like I get that that's not the story that he was telling. He wasn't gonna like tell all of these people's life stories and everything, but it would have been really nice to have some kind of like memorial page at the end with their names or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it was a pretty quick read for being over 200 pages. I think that when it was sitting in my library books pile for months and months, um, I was just intimidated by the physical size of it, but it was very fast.
Yeah.
And I just
It's just a really addicting read too.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say Nancy in our Goodreads group has a really nice review about it. So if you're on Goodreads, go check that out. You can find her through our Goodreads group page. And if you're not on Goodreads, check it out anyway.
Agreed. 100% agreed. Renee, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been for you, dude?
I've been good. Been a little busy with work, but that's good in these trying times. And comic books are always good, although been kind of in a I don't know, I guess fantasy, sort of dark fantasy type area for comics. Haven't been reading any kind of funny stories lately, other than my weeklies. But I guess this past week I read the first 5 volumes of a manga called Ubel Blatt, with story and art by Etoroji Shiono, and it's a fantasy revenge story. Basically, this knight who was a member of this group of knights that were sent by the emperor to go destroy a altar or something. It's kind of vague at the beginning, or at least where I'm at. They destroyed this altar of the enemy nation or something like that, and 3 of them died, and then 7 of them kind of ended up just being like, no, we're not doing it, we quit, and we're left to go back home. So only 4 of them went, finished the mission, and then on their way back home they were ambushed by the 7, killed, and then the 7 went back, became known as heroes throughout their country, and the 4 that actually finished the mission are kind of known as the disgraced lances, because they were all given lances by the emperor. But it turns out one of them survived and has been spending the last 20 years plotting his revenge, and then Ubel Blatt starts with him going to go make his vision board a reality.
Holy shit, dude. This sounds insane.
It's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. There's a lot of fantasy elements. There's a lot going on, but there's also technology. It's very graphic. But I've seen it half a dozen times in libraries and Barnes and Noble, and it's come across they're like, hey, you like crap like this, check it out. And I was finally like, you know what, I am going to check it out. And then then I ended up reading 4 volumes in a day. There's 24 volumes, I think, in the entire series, although I think in English they release 1 volume as a 2-in-1 type thing. Mm-hmm. So I've been reading that. And then in sadder news, so back in May, the mangaka Kentaro Miura passed away. And for those of you that don't know, Kentaro Miura drew the story Berserk, which is a manga that's been running since 1989. It's commonly known as a power fantasy book, but it's incredible. Mm-hmm. It's an incredibly dark series. But in reaction to Kentaro Miura's passing, I decided I needed to own Berserk finally, just because of the fantastical piece of art that it is. And personally, I don't think there will ever be another story like Berserk or another artist like Kentaro Miura. And I just decided I needed to have it. And so I bought the Dark Horse has been releasing the deluxe editions, which are just, these large volumes of or collections of Berserk in the 30 years that it's been running. And I think they have 7 or 9 volumes out. And I just having a hard time even talking, just because Berserk is such a big Goliath story, but it's incredibly emotional. Like the vastness of Berserk's world and the depth of each character is inconceivable. And just kind of knowing that we'll never see the end of it or have any of our questions answered just really, really kind of saddens me, you know.
Yeah.
But even
I mean, and it's one of those books that's been going on like since the like late 80s. Like 1989 was its published date. So like,
and it's
influenced generations of mangaka, you know?
Whenever you see, you know, the anime boy in black clothing and a gigantic sword, like that's because of Berserk. That's because of Guts.
Right.
You know, and there's you know, you read through Berserk and you see it and you're like, oh, that's where that reference comes from. It's very similar to like when you're reading JoJo's, you're like, that's where these people got that inspiration. Mm-hmm. But you know, even with Berserk being incomplete, you know, it's still a masterpiece and it's still worth the read. But I will say that it is filled with horrible, horrible things. It's incredibly graphic. It's just filled with graphic and horrific depictions of war, emotional, physical, sexual abuse. It's not something to go into lightly.
Right.
Only bad things happen in Berserk, and it is so emotional. It's gut-wrenching. It's so crushingly depressing. It is horrifying, heartbreaking, to say the least. But if you can get past that, if you have the strength for that,
right,
you know, it's still an incredible story, and you know, worth looking to. And I think that, you know, it's influenced countless stories, like we've said, and I think it's going to continue to do so. So yeah, that's what I read this week.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's really sad, the story behind the, you know, passing of Kentaro Miura. It's
Miura.
Mostly people are saying Miura, excuse me. It's unfortunate, if only because he passed away from what they're considering to be like stress related injury or like bodily damage.
Yeah,
right.
He had Berserk had hiatuses that were very, very legendary. His last hiatus, I think, was for more than a year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he would just be off and on, just because he put his heart and soul into those pages, and you can tell that he put everything into it. But it's, you know, creators giving their all for these stories.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know. I don't know how to move on to that naturally, so I'm just going to jump right into things.
What did you read, Mike?
For me, I've been kind of all over the place. I've been slowly but surely recovering from like this sprained ankle that I had. So ultimately, I've been like trying to get out more and do more things. And let's see, other than doing that, I bought a bunch of manga that I didn't necessarily need to own, but I wanted to. Like, I now own copies of Way of the House Husband in like physical form, and all 5 volumes of Chainsaw Man. I went out to Dewey's Comics out in Dover, New Jersey, which is attached to the Joe Kubert School of Art. Picked up Department of Truth Volume 1. So like, I've just been buying comics because I think that I have room, even though I definitely don't. Like, I can see boxes of comics still unpacked behind me, so I need to stop buying them. But nonetheless, I can't stop, won't stop. I've been reading a bunch of books. I've been slowly but surely catching up on Demon Slayer with our manga reading group on Discord. And yeah, I recorded a mini-sode with Nick yesterday about Ice Cream Man Quarantine Comics. So I read that recently because I've been kind of sitting on it waiting for us to record. So look forward to that in July. But the 2 books that I do want to talk about are Dead Dog's Bite #4. This is by Tyler Boss. It's basically the last issue of the run. It's very abrupt. It's a really quick like wrap up of the story, which kind of begs me to ask, you know, what is there more to this story than what I read in the first 3 issues? Because the 4th issue seemed to wrap things up very quickly. And I don't want to say that it was predictable, but it didn't seem like mind-warpingly interesting. So I'm wondering if I need to actually go back and read that entire book from start to finish. Tyler Boss has an incredible eye for design and layout, and I think that some of his comics are some of the most beautiful, precise books you can read on the shelves. I mean, you know, you think of some of the pages that really astound you in David Aja's Hawkeye, or any of the other books that David Aja's worked on, where you're just like, wow, look at that fucking page. Tyler Boss has that same sort of style. He's looking at things in a lens that I don't think a lot of creators are, where they're looking for page composition and style and symmetry and a million things at once. And not to diminish other artists, but I think that Boss is like, elevated his craft to a different level. And it's clear that he's done some of that work in Dead Dog's Bite. Like you saw it a lot in Four Kids Walk Into a Bank, and I think that comes along with a great collaborator. But the end of this issue was a little bit, I don't want to say unsatisfying, because it finished the story, but I feel like I need to go back and reread the whole book to get like a clearer picture of what Boss is going for in this book. And then one other thing that I will say about this book is the title credits font that he uses, like the credits font or just the font in general for the series, is some of the best use of a font to describe the feeling of a book that I've ever seen. There is just this overwhelmingly powerful, dark feeling that you get from looking at the font of this book, and I don't think I can think of another book that does that as well as this one does. So yeah, I mean, Dead Dog's Bite, it's a really interesting book. I think I need to go back and reread this since it's all out now. But there's that. And then the other book that I want to talk about really quick is The Nice House on the Lake #1. This came out a few weeks ago, and everybody and their sibling were talking about this on Twitter and how great it was. And I remember some folks on our Discord were talking about it as well, so I picked it up. This is James Tynion the fourth, Alvaro Martinez Bueno on pencils and inks, Jordi Belair on colors, and World Design on lettering. And this is probably one of the most intense #1s I've read in the last few years, the last decade. Like, I haven't felt this on edge, on my seat, almost going to have a panic attack since ever. I don't know if I ever read a book that made me feel like I need to go walk and do some breathing exercises after reading it, because this book freaked me the fuck out. And it's not in like oh no, there's a monster, oh no, there's a demon. There's something so creepy about the just build up of this book towards the end. And I definitely 100,000% do not want to spoil this for anyone, because the turn in this book, for me, I didn't see coming at all. And I was really, really impressed by it. I know that I talked to other people, they're like, yeah, well, it's pretty obvious. I don't care if you saw it coming. Like, that doesn't mean that my surprise is any less surprising, you know? So I really like that Tynion was able to really twist our arms with this and make us, basically distract us with one thing and then have another thing happen. The sense of realness to this book was disgusting in the best way possible. I felt like all of the characters that were in this book were real people. I felt like the story that he was building was really, like, honestly real and true, and like I could know someone like this. And it probably doesn't help that this book takes place in the New York area, and it feels like, yeah, I've gone to bars with people and had weird discussions and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I my only worry with this book so far is that I feel like we're going to get, the story is going to flatten itself out after the first issue. The mystery of the book is going to get solved too early. But because it's a 12-issue series, I think that Tynion he's probably going to do a great job with this book. Like, I don't know why I'm doubting it, but like, my worry is that it's going to get flattened out too soon, and the last couple of issues are just going to be drawn out into like a big question mark of like, that's kind of disappointing. But with what he's done so far with the Department of Truth, and James Tynion's a fantastic writer. Dude knows how to tell a really good story. So in a 12-issue series, I think he's going to actually lay things out, and we're going to get some good pacing and some really interesting discussion, especially as we explore all of the characters in the story. So yeah, the thing that really got me in this book was some of the art. The action moments in this issue, and I'm being super vague, floored me. Like, there are some interspliced bits with social media that I thought was really, really clever and like really well laid out in a way that made me feel like I was looking at a real internet feed of things. Like, if I pulled up a big page that had TweetDeck on it or something, I could see all this stuff. And I feel like, again, this book just is poking into my brain, and it hurts how well Tynion has either gotten to me or has just created a fantastic story. So the last thing I'll say about this is the lettering is incredible. I don't know what level of like work the World Design, the person from that company, and James Tynion did to try to make some of these pages work with the narration, the captions, and some of the sigils and the symbology that he uses for some things. But man, I really, really understood things in a way that was like kept me informed, sucked me right into the book, and kept me really interested, because this book feels so unique the more you read through it, and I'm really, really impressed by it. So here's hoping that #2 doesn't fall flat on its face. But yeah, this book's really good, and it'll scare the living shit out of you. I'll just say that. Let's move on. Let's talk about comic books that are coming out on June 16, 2021. What are you both excited for this week? I'm going to kick it over to Kait.
I'm excited for Maker Comics Survive the Outdoors by Mike Lawrence. This has 7 survival projects in it, so I've been a fan of the Maker Comics for really since it started. I think I picked up maybe like the 3rd book they ever released in this series, and I've kind of been following them since then. I haven't read everything that they've done in this series, but I really enjoy it. It's got a really good balance of like information about a topic, and then it also presents that in a story. And the story in this one, from the description, is that 2 kids go fishing in the woods with their grandpa, and a sprained ankle throws a wrench in their plans, and he has to teach them first aid, camping without a tent, cleaning a fish, and some more stuff. And I was in a co-ed Boy Scout organization called Venturing when I was a kid, so this is like right up my alley.
Nice. You're gonna go out into the forest and save someone's broken ankle or something?
I might. You never know.
Okay. I believe in you, Kate. Renee, what about you? What are you excited for this upcoming week?
Look, I've been really, really enjoying a new series that has really kind of blown beyond my expectations. Like, I had high expectations at the beginning of it, and it's only raised the bar each week that I've been reading it. Mm-hmm. And this series, of course, is Hard-Boiled Cop and Dolphin. Chapter 47 next week. Chapter 40. Things have gotten serious, guys. Okay, so first of all, story and art by the incomparable Ryuhei Tamura. But again, things have gotten serious. We've had some flashbacks. We've had some battles. And like a porpoise with a purpose, it's on. It's so on. The writing has only gotten better. It's outrageous. It's serious. It's got mythology. It's great. It's great if you aren't reading Hard-Boiled Cop and Dolphin because of the way that it looks, because it's got a dolphin and a hard-boiled cop, because there's a little girl that can talk to animals and also turn animals into gangsters. You got to let all that stuff go.
What?
Just be free. Read the manga. You won't regret it.
Okay. I you're not the first person to recommend this book to me, and I feel like maybe I should just do it. Maybe I should just go in and catch up because it's only 47 chapters, right?
Yes.
That's just a good sitting.
Mike Rappin, have I ever steered you wrong on manga?
I mean, honestly, I don't think so. So, I should just dive right into this. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll consider that once I finish Demon Slayer, I'll pick this up and just drive through it really quick. But for me this week, I'm excited for Time Before Time #2. This is Declan Shalvey and Rory McConville, art by Joel Palmer, colors by Chris O'Halloran. I can't stop thinking about this book. I don't know what to say about it because it's time travel, it's crime, it's kind of weird. The art's a little wonky sometimes, but I think that all factors into kind of the strangeness of this book. I think Joel Palmer's art is kind of maybe not for everyone, but for me, I think that if you had a more quote unquote realistic art style or something that was more traditional, it probably wouldn't work as well with a story like this that kind of needs this blurry layer of how does that scientifically make sense? Because time travel is messy, but I think that with the serious twist in issue #1, with our protagonist and his friend and time travel and all that stuff, I think that there's a lot of potential for this book to be really cool. I also think there's a lot of potential for this book to fizzle out in a way that is really exciting. Means that it could end abruptly, but in a way that is satisfying. So I really want to see more of this time traveling crime stuff, and I think that Shalvey and McConville have done a good job of telling a story that works without making you think too hard. And again, that description of it, something meets Looper, it makes me so mad at how accurate it is. I don't want it to be that, but nonetheless, this book's great, and I think everybody should be checking it out. And it's probably going to make a really, really good trade, like a really good collected edition. The first arc of the story is probably going to read super, super well. But I love #1, and I think #2 is going to be even better. So with that being said, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic because I dove into this thinking one thing and then suddenly was flabbergasted with the results. So we're going to be talking about revisiting a comic or two that you read when you first got into comics. My pick will astound you. We'll be back in just a second. Today I am talking to two insane comic book co-conspirators, folks that have worked on books that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't. I'm here with Dave Baker and Nicole Goux. We are here to talk about Everyone Is Tulip, their brand new comic that's dropping from Dark Horse on June 16 in comic shops, June 29th everywhere else. Dave, Nicole, how are you both doing? Dave, welcome back to the show. Nicole, welcome to I Read Comic Books. Could you tell us a little bit about what Everyone Is Tulip is, I guess, as a comic book and why everyone should go and pick it up?
Yeah, sure. Everyone Is Tulip is a 160 some odd page graphic novel written by me, illustrated and co-colored by Nicole, along with colorist Ellie Hall. And it's about a young woman from Arizona who moves to Los Angeles with the hopes of working in Hollywood as an actor. And she ends up getting sucked up into the high-stakes world of YouTube performance art, which is a real thing. And she's involved in a series of kind of bizarre online performance art videos that kind of go viral, and she becomes this kind of meme in LA, sort of, and she is forced to kind of reckon with the nature of online viral fame, and also is presented with questions of kind of how far is she willing to go to get what she wants, and what compromises is she willing to make in order to kind of preserve her moments in the sun, as it were.
Holy smokes. It sounds extremely heavy in a lot of ways. Is that what you guys were going for with this?
We don't often do light.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I've read, I read some of the Fuck Off Squad books that you guys did. I guess, you're trying to get into like actual people's hearts and minds. And I think that this book, at least from the pages that I've seen, for those of you who are listening right now, you can go to everyoneistulip.com and read 48 pages of this graphic novel for free. But yeah, I love everything that I've seen so far. I mean, I think in your director's commentary that you did for the first episode or first page of the book that was on the website, you mentioned that this book had been building for like 5 years. How do you build a story like this for 5 years? And I guess what was like the holdup, if you don't mind my asking?
It's a combination of a couple things. Dave and I conceived of this about 5 years ago while we were on a trip to Thought Bubble in Leeds. And we kind of went to the show, sold some books, and then decided to travel around. We went to Paris and to London and kind of had a little vacation after the show. And we spent the whole time talking about this book. And we were mostly self-publishing at the time. So we kind of, with the intention of pitching it around, just started the book. And we were working on it for a while, and kind of right in the middle of it, I got the job to draw Shadow of the Batgirl for DC. So
right.
I had to kind of do both for about a year, and a combination of me multitasking, us trying to pitch the book to Dark Horse and a couple other publishers, as well as find a colorist to work on and finish the book with us. It just kind of ended up being this extended period of time where it took a little longer than we were expecting, but also comics in general just takes a lot longer than people think it does.
Right.
Yeah, 160 some odd pages. That's not something that you just wake up and roll out of bed and is just done, right. Unfortunately.
Right.
It's not just the drawing of the book, though, because there's so much you end up waiting for publishers or doing this or that, or the end process of putting the book together. Everything just takes longer than you think it's going to every time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, coming from like the self-published world, what made the change from doing this, like publish it yourself and doing the distribution, everything that you normally would for your other books, and instead working with Dark Horse? Like, where did that changeover happen? Or was the idea to work with Dark Horse from the get-go?
We had put out, you mentioned Fuck Off Squad, which is our coming-of-age romance skater kid comic that Silver Sprocket put out. And that book, I think people liked it. I think there was a little bit of that indie buzz, as they say. And
I liked it.
Thank you. I like it too, but I'm probably biased because, like,
right.
I like the characters in that book more than like some of my own family members. So I wouldn't take my opinion on it as completely unbiased. But the book found its way into the hands of some people over at Dark Horse, specifically our editor, Connor Knudsen, who approached us at a show and was just like, hey, I read this Fuck Off Squad thing and it's really good. Do you guys want to do something at Dark Horse? Like, do you have any other ideas? And I was like, yeah, let's fucking party. and so I sent him some ideas and we talked about some stuff, and then he, I showed him some pages for Tulip and he was like, whoa, this is cool. Also, it didn't hurt that, after Nicole's name, there's a little parenthetical that says DC Comics Shadow of the Batgirl.
Right.
So, that I think that kind of helped grease the wheels, because, I don't know that there's a ton of comics that are kind of like Tulip. Now there's stuff that's sort of starting to be produced like it, I think people who like Snot Girl would like our book. People who like, maybe Bloom or This One Summer, maybe they might be into it. But there's not a ton of like well-produced, sad people sitting in rooms talking comics that just, that look like this.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very funny that you say that, because I look over at my shelf and those are all the books that are sitting there. So I guess this book was also made for me as a comic book reader, which makes me very excited. And the thing that, I think is really interesting is like, this feels like something that's very unique for Dark Horse's publishing, because again, you name a bunch of books and those books are coming from like First, Second and publishers that I think are trying to do a little bit more, less capesy books, less books that are kind of oriented towards the, the big comic book distribution model, and instead like focusing on these OGNs that I think are harder to sell in some comic shops, but then there are people like me who actively seek out these kinds of books. So that's, to me, really, really exciting. I know that you guys have done other OGNs in the past and stuff, but to see Dark Horse pushing into this is really exciting for me as a reader.
Yeah, me too. But I'm very curious to see how it's going to go. I mean, honestly, like, from my perspective, there's nowhere to go but up. Like,
totally.
Nicole, obviously, Nicole's the smoke show here. She's the one that's got the massive fan base and the legions of people being like, Nicole, please, Nicole, look at me. I'm here. Notice me, senpai. Notice me.
That's not a thing.
So this is Snot Girl, is what you're saying.
Yeah. But for me, like, I'm and Nicole, joking aside, like, we're both so used to self-publishing that, for something that we made and created completely and own completely, for it to get a wide distribution and be seen by a bunch of people, hopefully, that's a really big, step up, whether that's a couple thousand more, whether that's 1,000 more, whether that's 15,000 more, I have no idea, but I'm just very excited about the potential of it.
Yeah, self-publishing allows you a lot of freedom for what you want to make and how you want to make it. You can do literally anything that you want. But in terms of the number of eyes that are going to be on your work, even if you do a really good job of calling shops and sending your book out and getting it to as many places as you want, Dave and I hand sell our books personally at conventions, and that's how we get them to people. Having a company like Dark Horse, who just has kind of the mechanisms to distribute your book in this kind of broader way, it makes a lot of difference for the number of people who are going to be exposed to what you make.
For sure.
I mean, I feel like that's how we met you guys, isn't it? I feel like we met you at like a show, maybe in Chicago, maybe? I don't remember. But I feel like...
Yeah, it was either Emerald City or Chicago. I can't remember one of those two, but like, yeah, we definitely, like, I just happened to walk by, I saw a book and I was like, oh, this looks really cool. And then I think we just exchanged contact and we just like kept in contact after that. But yeah, I mean, like that whole exchange is definitely in my mind, like what the self-publishing world looks like. I don't think I'm going to establish a connection with someone at Dark Horse in that same kind of manner,
Yeah, totally. Or even just like, the existential black hole that is self-publishing is that your book only gets out in those specific parameters. Whereas with Dark Horse, they've got warehouses. They're going to be shipping books all over the country, even the world. Like, you're going to be able to order it through Diamond, even though Diamond isn't going to be here for that much longer. And, all of these, mechanisms where, you can go into a comic book store and the odds of seeing Action Hospital on the shelf is very small, because I personally will have had to sold them that. Whereas the odds of seeing Everyone Is Tulip on the shelf, hopefully, will be dramatically higher, which is something I'm very excited about, because I feel like there's a real gap in the market, and there's a readership that's hungry for stuff like this. And Nicole's artwork is really good. Ellie's colors are really good, and I don't think I'm a terrible writer, so there's that.
Well, and to steer this a little bit back towards the book, I mean, one of the things that I noticed that becomes like crucial, like even from the first like 20 pages of this book, is the influence from social media. So I was curious, like, you guys do this really cool thing with, I think you talked about in the commentary, like I was glued to that when I watched it. So thank you for putting that video out. You talked about this like social diamond thing with the iPhones and stuff that you said started in another book and carried over to this one. Like, how does the like change over the last couple of years of social media as like one thing dies and another thing grows influence this book?
That's something that is definitely been on both of our minds since the book has been done for an extended period of time. And like when we started this book, TikTok wasn't a thing really, and now it's everywhere. And it thankfully, I don't feel like the book has been completely pushed out of relevancy or become dated in some major way,
right?
Which I'm very excited about. But I'm also just excited that like you're talking about within the book, there's this narrative mechanic where we have 9-panel grids, and then inside of the grids there are patterns using cell phones replacing certain numbers of the panels to create shapes, either an X or a diamond, and both of those shapes play thematically into the structure of the story, and they also play visually into the constructions of the pages. And Nicole just did such an amazing job realizing that, and rendering that in 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's so easy for me to be like, all right, so I got this idea, right? We're gonna have a 9-panel grid, but if you pull your eyes back and look at it, there's gonna be phones that form an X over the page, and that's gonna be thematically related to what's inside the page.
Right.
Saying that is, that's so easy, but Nicole executing that so brilliantly and making it communicate so well is really what I think pulls the whole book together. Like there are multiple narrative mechanics like that inside of Tulip that I don't know that another artist could be. Like, Nicole truly is a co-creator of this book, and I know that there's going to be dumbasses who talk about the book and say Dave Baker's Everyone Is Tulip, which is it's
right.
stupid. Like, writers can't be auteurs in the comics medium. It's just not a thing that can happen. Watchmen is only great because of fucking Dave Gibbons. And now this concludes the meeting of the Nicole Goux fan club. Mike, I pass the mic back to you.
There's been plenty of that for one episode.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and Nicole, I guess to kind of like to get into your head about this, how did you go about like designing? I don't know if you thought about this, like Tulip's phone. I think a lot of times when you see phones like this in media in any kind, like just the look of the phone and how the phone is designed and all that stuff can really speak many words about like a certain character. Like, was that going through your head as you were showing Tulip's phone throughout the book?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely part of the thought process when you do anything like that. And, I started drawing this 5 years ago, and essentially I was using my phone as a kind of basis for what I was looking at. And at the time, I already had an outdated phone. So Tulip is, or rather Becca, is not necessarily someone who's supposed to be super up on the times, at least when we start the book. She doesn't have a lot of money. She is not really keyed into how the industry works. And she has kind of this sort of outdated phone. Now that this book is coming out 5 years later from when I started drawing it, that's even more kind of drawn out and extended for, what her technology looks like. But I think it still kind of plays as, there's, like Dave said, there's a real risk when you dive into topics like this of making something that's dated very quickly. But I like to think of it more as like a snapshot of a certain time, because the technology just changes so quickly that you kind of can't ever keep up in a meaningful way when things take as long as they do to make. And so instead of worrying overly about, Instagram is not as big a deal, it's more TikTok now, it's kind of like, this is the environment that we lived in for this span of time and that we're commenting on. But also our next book takes place in 2005, so we just completely went backwards in time.
Right.
But yeah, I think like there's always a risk, and you always have to consider the way that technology changes and how it affects the way characters interact and how we interact with our world. Like, how many people are going to be reading this comic on their phones on our website that we're putting it out on, so that stuff then is like another meta level of dealing with technology. It's just so pervasive through our lives that there is no world in which you can't consider it anymore.
Definitely. Now I think we've gone far beyond the comic. And now this is the a philosophy podcast where we're going to talk about how technology influences our life, but because I think that's really interesting, that that is a portion of the book, just this overnight sensation thing that I really enjoyed. There was something that you guys had mentioned about watching, like there are these YouTube videos that kind of formed the basis of this story. Could you guys tell me a little bit about that? Because I feel like I'm missing some context there.
Yeah, sure. So there's a weird little ecosystem of people who all kind of do this thing of these weird atonal performance art videos. There's a Russian performance artist named Dolvita who takes photos where she's like, it's a typical influencer shot where it's somebody like posing in front of a mirror or whatever, but all of the walls will be made with bacon, and it's like it's like an anti eating animals or pro vegan thing or something like that, or
Sure.
There's another person named Poppy who does a similar thing where she's they're like these weird David Lynch short film style atonal things where it's performance art and she plays a character, and even to a certain degree, like Bella Porch, who's like the biggest TikToker right now, is kind of like that. Bella Porch is a little bit more commercial and naked in her, in air quotes, influencing, where it's kind of these silly videos where she's lip syncing to things, but it's also kind of not, like, you can see her life changing over the course. She has 64 million followers right now, which is just I can't that's larger than like a lot of countries, like that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, isn't there like 150 million people in the US? Is that right? Or is it 300 million?
I think it's like 350 million.
All right, so if it's 350 million, that's like a third of America follows Bella Porch. That's crazy. Right. That's crazy. Right. And you can see it reflecting in her real life and the decisions she's made, and the, not to be mean, but elective surgeries that she's partaken in, and it's very interesting to see how that amount of attention can warp someone's world in a positive or a negative way. Right. And so there's like I was saying, there's like a weird little ecosystem of these people who do kind of, in air quotes, fine art-esque influencing, which I don't really like the title influencer. It kind of doesn't make sense to me because it's not about the act of doing something. It's about the effect, Like, it'd be really like, instead of being a comic book artist, it would be like being called like a paper pusher or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's like the act is that you are creating a thing. The act is that you are making something and putting it into the world as a creator or an artist. And influencing isn't about that thing. It's about the radiating waves that thing has, Yeah. Yeah. It's just really, really weird to me that that's the title that we've all collectively agreed on. But yeah, I'm very interested in new media stuff. I work in a new media company. I'm constantly surrounded by it, both for the positive and the negative. And, Nicole and I got really into a few of these people a couple of years ago, and we're really kind of obsessed with their lives and their trajectories. And it's very interesting to see where they've all gone.
Definitely. That you mentioned some of those names, and I'm starting to recognize like where a lot of this is coming from. So now now my interest is even more piqued as to where this book is going to go after the few pages that we've had so far that are available online, which, again, everyoneistulip.com. Everyone go check that out. It's incredible. My last question, I guess, before we wrap up here is, we've been really getting focused on this on the show, so I'm curious to know what your process is, Nicole. Like, I believe you did the lettering for this book as well. How did you go about, like, structuring the book to make sure that the lettering worked for what you guys, like what Dave had written?
Yeah, so that dilemma of
hey now,
not specific to you, but it can be specific to you. That dilemma of fitting text into artwork like that is something that's actually really hard for me. And the thing that really shifted my process is when I got my iPad and started working on Procreate, to be able to, I actually letter as one of the very first stages of my process now.
Oh.
So I'll do like thumbnails, and then I will, as I pencil, I drop in letters to make sure that there's space, and I draw bubbles into the page. And I do draw them on top, so if we need to change stuff, we can. And also if Dave wants to rewrite stuff later, that's fine. But we know exactly how much space there is, and I know exactly how much space around the bubbles there are for the artwork that I'm trying to fit in there. Because, you know, a couple of our early books I didn't plan as well, or I didn't have the processes down in the same way, and we had to shove lettering sideways into a panel or cover up something that I didn't want to cover. And it was really frustrating to me. And so kind of discovering that I could do this all at once was kind of groundbreaking for me. It also makes my process take longer. So it's a double-edged sword. I'm like lettering before anything's even done, and sometimes that can bite you in the ass later. But it really, really makes a difference for me to be able to figure out exactly how much space I need before I finish my drawings.
Gotcha. It makes me wonder how people even manage to make lettering work when they're all, you know, there's 4 or 5 people in the process, you know, with editing and all that other stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, to play devil's advocate, I would argue that a lot of mainstream comics don't make lettering work. Like, I think, you know, this is not a slight on the letterer or letterers in general. I think it's just a reality that I think because mainstream and specifically big 2 lettering and the creative conveyor belt is built to separate, you know, powers and to shore up editorial say as opposed to creative influence from the actual creators. That's why you get things like, you know, a bunch of guys jumping out of a plane on a splash page, and then there's 15 word balloons where they're like having a conversation while flying through the air in one panel, because somebody somewhere fucked up and the artist changed a panel and didn't realize something, and now we have to do an exposition dump in one place. It's the only space in the book that has it, so this is what we got to do. Like, so much of that stuff, because it's such a churn and burn environment, you know, the monthly deadlines are just brutal. Like, it's totally, you know, it's not conducive to good comics always. Which is, you know, probably not going to be changing anytime soon. But, you know, I just wish people had longer lead times. Like, I was watching an interview with Brian Hitch the other day, and he was talking about how for the Ultimates, they started that book and he had to turn in the completed first issue of pencils in 1 month. Like, they didn't have any lead time to develop or work on the actual thing. And like, look how much of an impact that story has had. Like, that first volume of the Ultimates is basically what the whole entire MCU is built off of. And imagine if they had had like 6 months lead time. It would have been crazy. Who knows what they would have gotten? Maybe we would have gotten a third Ultimates book instead of that, you know, dog shit Joe Mad thing.
Well, listen, no one wants Mark Millar to write any more Marvel books, I think. That's what it comes down to.
Same here. I don't want Mark Millar to write anything. Like,
Well, as much as I would love to keep going with that, I do want to compliment Nicole one more time. Page 22 and 23 of this book is absolutely beautiful, and I think a lot of people will pick this book up just on that page. Just want to shout that out. It's like just a 2-page spread that is just Becca just saying everyone is Tulip. I was like fell out of my chair when I saw it, so I just wanted to make sure I shout that up because I had that in my notes. But yeah, thank you both so much for hanging out with me today. Sorry, Nicole, I didn't give you a chance to tell me to stop complimenting you, but
we both know that's one of the reasons why I'm always so ecstatic about her work, because I can tell it makes her uncomfortable.
Sorry, I don't mean to be rude. But really, I do thank you both for coming on the show. This was an absolute blast. I very much look forward to reading the full Everyone Is Tulip, and everyone out there should go pick it up on June 16 at your comic shop, or from wherever else you buy comic books on June 29. This looks like it's going to be a fantastic read, so I'm very excited to get it in my hands.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about dumb shit.
Liz, I love talking dumb shit, especially when it comes to comics. Where can people find the both of you on the internet if they wanted to maybe ask you some more questions about what you really think about Diamond distributors?
You can find me at NicoleGoux.com, or on Twitter at Nicole Goux, or Instagram at @NGoux, and my last name is spelled Goux.
And you can find me at heydavebaker.com, or on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at xdavebakerx. Or if you want to listen to my podcast, I co-host and produce an explainer podcast called Deep Cuts, where my co-host Andrew Price and I pick an obscure topic and walk the listener through the ins, the outs, and the nitty-gritty, so they can appear like an interesting and idiosyncratic person at their next forced social function. We've even, in fact, we go ham, man. We do crazy shit. We did a whole episode about the rise and fall of Napster, but we did it as a musical. 11 original songs, 2.5 hours. You get to hear my dulcet tones. We also did an episode about Buckaroo Banzai and the many unmade sequels. And we got Earl Mac Rausch and W.D. Richter, the writer and director of the original movie, to produce and write an original 10-minute narrative sequence that goes at the end of our episode. And we got 2 of the actors from the movie, Pepe Serna as the Reno Kid, and Billy Vera as Pinky Carruthers, to be in the scene. So it's me, my co-host, and 2 of the characters from Buckaroo Banzai canonically hanging out.
Amazing. Well, I'll put all the links to that in our show notes for this episode. Thank you both again. Don't forget, everyoneistulip.com has all the information, and you could read 48 pages for free of this book. It's amazing. Thank you again, Nicole and Dave. We will talk to you all soon. Before we get into this week's topic, I forgot to announce our Discord picks for this week. So Danny said that he's excited for Venom 200. I just wanted to shout that out because I totally missed it in my notes. But let's get into things. Let's revisit a comic or two that we read when we first got into comic books. I'm really curious to know what René and Kait have to say. So let's just start with you guys, because my pick is just absolutely awful. Kait, what book did you revisit for this episode?
Oh boy. Well, I revisited Sailor Moon. I feel like I've always said my first comic book was Runaways, but then I realized a few months back that it was Sailor Moon. I was picking up Sailor Moon when I was like 11. This was so long ago, I'd forgotten about it.
That's here's the thing, like, what buried Sailor Moon in the back of your head so that when you revisited it, did you like become a child again when you picked it up?
I feel like I forgot about this because I had originally gotten into the anime, and I read the manga as like a way to keep going with the story, like keep it, I don't know, be able to pick it up whenever I wanted, basically, instead of having to wait for the show to be on TV. And when I revisited it, I had actually tried to revisit it a few years ago, and I couldn't do it. There are some things about it that are kind of cringy now.
Sure.
And I just couldn't keep going. Like, I feel like I rewatched that first episode or reread that chapter 1 back in maybe 2019. And I was like, oh no, I can't do it. This is going to ruin my good memories of Sailor Moon back when I was a kid. And this time I knew that going in. I knew that originally they had adapted Sailor Moon into English back in like the 90s, and then turned that version into the anime for the English translation. and they'd really censored it, and they'd really Americanized like the names and everything. And even some of the original translation terms were really rough, especially around any technology. Like they called like what was basically a walkie-talkie a remote. And
Oh yeah, that tracks. That makes total sense.
Yeah. And going back into it, I knew that they had since retranslated it, so it's much more modern for the technology terms, and they didn't censor it as much, and they kept the Japanese names. And just knowing that they kept trying, like they kept bringing it back, it was still popular enough to make it better, pretty much. That really helped revisit.
Well, what kind of censorship did they put it or pull out of the story?
So the main thing that really stood out was that there is a same-sex lesbian couple later on in the series, and they tried to make them cousins for the English translation.
Right. Kissing cousins that sleep in the same bed, cousins that hold hands, cousins that, come on.
Yep. That's what happened.
Oh no.
And then, actually, one of the things that they did when they retranslated the manga is that they took out the commentary from the creator in the manga, which was kind of like, the commentary in manga sometimes is very distracting, and sometimes it doesn't really add anything to the story, and half the time I don't read it, But for this,
I disagree, but okay, that's fine.
No, okay, so for Sailor Moon, I think that her commentary, this is by Naoko Takuchi, that really did add something to the story for me. Like, knowing that this woman created this story to kind of celebrate women and femininity really did help. My rereading of it, where sometimes those things can kind of bother me if something is like too much. Like, for example, in the first chapter / the first episode, there's this whole thing about a jewelry store. All of these girls are really into going and trying to buy some of this very expensive jewelry, and it feels really capitalist to me. But at the same time, like, reading the creator's commentary about it, she's like, these things aren't, like, enjoying jewelry isn't a bad thing, and I wanted to kind of highlight that and make it not awful.
Sure.
And the fact that they took that kind of commentary out, I feel like it didn't hurt the manga, but I knew that it had been there before, and I missed it.
Gotcha.
And but going back to your censorship question, one of the things that was in this commentary was that the creator was like, I feel like the anime is more male gazy than what I made the manga out to be. And yeah, like, there are definitely, now that I've like researched this a little bit more, I know that in the original Japanese version of the anime, there is definitely more detail in the nudity than what they kept in the English version. And I haven't watched enough of the new translation, the kind of like revisited anime, to see if they kept that part censored or not. Like, I don't think that there's any like full frontal nudity or anything, but with the like magical girl transformations, there's definitely some more detail than you necessarily need for this. Like, I guess I say that as an American, like,
right.
But, or like, there's scenes where this, like, one of the sailors takes a bath, and you definitely can like see through the water versus not see through the water for the English version. Just things like that.
I mean, I guess maybe there's less taboo-ness about boobies in Japan, though I think that's absolutely not the case. So
yeah, it was just really interesting that even the creator had noticed this about the anime.
Yeah. Well, I American, I don't know, the Americanization of pretty much everything causes a lot of censorship. Like Dragon Ball, for instance, is one of those things where, you watch the early Dragon Ball cartoons, and there's definitely moments where where Goku is walking around with his little tiny boy penis hanging out, and it's done for comedic effect. Like, and you read the manga and it's in there, and it's not sexualized, it's not anything. It's just a little boy took his pants off and ran around. And I think that as adults, people find that funny. Like when a little kid just like runs naked, you go, oh no, that kid is naked. But I don't know. I think like for Sailor Moon, it was that it was kind of like a sexualization of women, like teenage girls and stuff, which is kind of not okay by any means. But I don't know. It depends. Maybe there's more to it that I just don't understand. But Americanization of a lot of things tends to typically censor stuff like that when it could remotely be taken sexually.
Yeah. I think I am going to keep going with this in some form. I haven't quite decided if I'm going to rewatch the original or the newer version of the anime. I have noticed that, like with the original version of the anime, there's kind of this nice pastel coloring to it, even though it is definitely an older anime style. But then the newer anime that they like redid the art for, it's like the backgrounds are beautiful, like very, I don't know, I don't want to say like a Miyazaki style because that's not quite right, but that much more, I don't know, soft, kind of very natural art to the background. But then the speaking characters are like airbrushed, like the totally different art style, and I found it distracting. But from the little bit that I did reread and rewatch in both the old versions and the new versions, the Crystal, it's called Sailor Moon Crystal. The new version is a little bit more true to that original manga. That is not like if it had not been Americanized.
Gotcha. Yeah, Danny in our chat is saying that Sailor Moon Crystal is top-notch animation. So I guess if you're trying to get into Sailor Moon, maybe you start there rather than trying to go back to the OG stuff.
Yeah, I actually watched a YouTube video called "Why You Should Watch the OG Sailor Moon Anime, You Cowards." And
oh no,
that was a really good YouTube video. She did a very good job of kind of giving you the rundown, much better than what I'm doing.
Gotcha. Well, maybe I'll link that in the chat for people that want to potentially look into that. But before we dig any further into Sailor Moon, Renee, what about you? What's something that you wanted to revisit? I know your list is a little bit bigger than mine and Kate's.
So because I had I grew up with comics. My brothers had comics and whatnot.
Sure.
And then I just kind of fell off with them for a very long time, and then it was like my junior year of high school that I went to go visit my brother out in California, and he bought me a random issue. He was like, pick out a comic book that you want, and I grabbed one, and then that got me back into it. So I still have all these comics, and I actually went back and bought some of the ones that I remember reading as a kid. So I have all these comics and whatnot. So, and I reread. The weird thing is that when you said, grab one and reread it if you haven't in a while, but it's like I reread these comics a lot.
Okay.
Just because that's of like I guess it's like people are like, oh, instead of watching a new show, we're gonna watch our old favorites. I don't do that with TV shows, but I do that with comics all the time. Like I read Hikaru no Go like at least once or twice a year, like through the whole series.
I mean, I can understand that though. that book is probably one of the best manga I've ever read.
Yeah, it's so good. And I reread through Naruto every once in a while, and Dragon Ball Z, because I have almost all of Dragon Ball Z. Well, look, I don't want to say that my manga collection's impressive, but it's not impressive.
Yeah.
But so I think I'll just go with Hikaru no Go because I almost have that series collected all the way in physical volumes. I mean, the whole series is on the Shonen Jump app. So, I mean, I can, if I am reading through it, then I'm like, no, I don't have the next volume. All right, we're going to the phone. But like, I was rereading Hikaru no Go volume 1 for this, and I was like, man, this is so good. Because I actually originally read like the first chapter in like a preview book that my friend had given me. And that made me want to actually I saved up money from my summer job, and then I went and I bought the first volume.
I mean, that first chapter is pretty good, though Hikaru is kind of a little shit.
He's a little shit through like most of the series. It isn't really.
I know that's why I'm kind of surprised that first volume or first chapter would be enough to be like, I got to get the rest of this.
I think I still have this preview book. I think I do. I do. I found it immediately, and I think it's like it's the first thing. I don't know what it was I have no idea why, but I was like, you know what? I want to know more about this boy, this board game, and this ghost. It just captured me on a level that I don't think I could begin to explain.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I still have this previews book. That's how much
René,
it captured me.
I feel like your room must just be overflowing with nostalgic items. I don't understand where you keep it all.
It's not even. Here's the thing: is I don't have a lot of things other than books. Like, I don't keep stuff.
Okay.
I don't keep stuff like other than books. Like, honestly, I found my yearbooks, but I was like, the only reason that they're here is because they're books. Because like I don't have anything else from high school. Like someone was like, "Oh, do you have that megaphone that the cast all signed for the play we were in?" No, I didn't keep that crap. It's not a book. I don't care. But the point is, Hikaru no Go is excellent, and like Kait was saying with censorship and with Sailor Moon, there's actually something very interesting at the end of Volume 1 where someone in the American translation, someone puts a piece of gum on a Go board. But in the Japanese version, it's a cigarette.
Oh, right.
And so when you get to volume 2, like he's sticking this piece of gum, but there's smoke, and you're like, why is there smoke from a piece of gum? Oh, it just must be because it's cold, and the gum was from his warm mouth, I guess.
From his that's
and then like
his warm mouth.
I don't know. And then he's like, I'm gonna put a cigarette on your hand if you can't guess this thing or whatever. And it's like I always thought, like, when I first read that, I was like, that seems a bit extreme. He spit gum on a Go board, and now he's threatening to put a cigarette on his hand. He's not an adult. And I was like, no, that's the point, is that he's a dangerous kid. Okay,
he's a dangerous boy.
He's like the kid from the Karate Kid who's, smoking up a doobie at the Halloween dance in the bathroom stall. Like, that's a dangerous dude.
So René, what was it like going back to this book? I guess if you reread this pretty regularly, like, I do. How has your view on this book changed since you were like younger to now?
I guess I understand it a little bit more, and I always try to solve the problems. Since I actually know a little bit about Go now, as opposed to like when I first read it, I had no idea what was going on. I was just like, hey, that's a colorful design on that thing. Whereas now I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can actually solve this problem. And the other difference is that, when I read it the first time, I had no idea what was going on. And I was just kind of taking it in and being swept away by the magic on the pages. Whereas now I'm reading it because it's interesting, but at the same time, I want to capture those moments that are my favorite again. There's, and this happens like there's farther moments in the series, like when, I guess it's in volume 1, Hikaru snaps down a stone properly for the first time, and the art is gorgeous, and watching it unfold on those panels, that you sort of get this feeling that I think is that, like, it's probably not as strong as the first time, but it's still such a wonderful moment that I enjoy revisiting it again, and it gets me excited to read the rest of the series. Yeah. But I think it's like, one is that knowing in the back of my mind, that was a good series. It is a good series. But rereading it and sort of knowing how it is now that I've completed it, but being able to go back through it again, I don't know. I just enjoy it. But like, it's weird because that it's good. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly.
No, I understand. Like, there's a nostalgia to it, and I totally get that. I guess what's really interesting here is I feel like you and Kait picked a book that you were like, or René, you've got a couple of other books, but like, you guys picked some options that were like, I have fond memories of reading this thing. I picked a book that I have slightly fond memories of. Like, I remember reading it and thinking like, this is so fucking cool, guys. Like, I love this book. I picked Battle Pope Volume 1 to go back to and read. This is by Robert Kirkman and Tony Moore. And I just want to say that this book has not aged well. I repeat, it has not aged well, to say the least.
Bless you.
I think the reason I really liked this book when I was younger is because I was in college, and like, I just like freshman year of college, and I felt really cool reading a book about like the Pope, and it was so anti-religion, and oh man, look at how blasphemous this book is. It's talking about the Pope, and Jesus is in the book, and Jesus is like an idiot with a gun, and they're killing demons, and the Pope is like, he's like, having sex with a bunch of women and stuff, and women just can't resist it. I thought that was funny. I thought that was really funny for some reason. So, like, for those of you that don't know, but Battle Pope is a story about the world ending, demons coming up from hell, and then the world kind of making a mutual agreement after this rapture where people are raptured to heaven, that like everyone who stays on earth has like can basically work with demons, but some people still go to hell, and there like is this door that went to hell, but it is now closed. And Saint Michael is sent down to basically watch over the remaining people on earth, even though they're all sinners and bad people, including the Pope, who was like a womanizer and a hard drinker before everyone got raptured. And the Pope ends up sleeping with this woman, and these demons show up and they kill the woman, and then they kill him. But then God and Jesus are like, hey, you can't die. You need to actually save Saint Michael, who's been taken by Lucifer. Lucifer's trying to steal his halo, which is where angels get all their powers. And so Battle Pope, I guess, whatever, he goes on a quest to try to save Michael, but his sidekick is Jesus, and it's all just nonstop like, don't worry, I'm going to kill all these people and then sleep with these hot babes. That's the comic book. And there's more to the story. Like, Kirkman does his, he sets up the world so that basically Battle Pope can go around and be a shithead, and it seems like normal, and it feels like a 90s comic book come back into the year 2000, because that's when this book came out, the year 2000. And Tony Moore's art is okay. Like, I think it's very much Tony Moore, but at the same time, the line work is so heavy. I was wondering if Todd McFarlane like inked this book. Yeah, it's I remember why I thought this book was cool. And then I think I started reading other comics and went, oh yeah, don't ever go back to that. And I never did. And I follow some podcasters who like talk about this book, about how wild it is and how that it exists and that it was made by Robert Kirkman. And it's clear that this is a very, very, very early Robert Kirkman book. This is when he was basically just trying to get people to look at his book versus, following it up a few years later with The Walking Dead and creating one of the most successful comic book franchises in recent history. I think, Kirkman as a businessman is probably really smart in that he knows what will get people to pick up his books and see his name and kind of have them go, what the hell is this book? Because Battle Pope, I think, exactly was that. From my understanding, this book didn't last very long. I only read the first 4 issues because that was all I could put myself through. Honestly, this book it's every single page is just another bad joke, like something sexist, something over the top, something that feels like someone that read a bunch of 90s comics. Like if you read Lobo, or you read Spawn, or you read Savage Dragon, or you read Youngblood back in the day, and then you wanted to make a comic that was like an homage to the mentality of like, I'm a badass dude. The comic book, that's what Battle Pope is. And then of course it doesn't help that it's, basically making fun of like the Christian religion, but like not in an overt way, just like using the characters of the religion, which to me, makes a lot of people mad. But yeah, or I guess for my understanding, it makes people mad. But yeah, it's yeah, I don't know what else to say about this. I went back and I could not read much more than the few issues that I read. You guys have any questions? Because I'll gladly scream about this book some more.
I do. I'm curious what you guys think these early comics did for your interest in comics. Like, did it cause you to look for similar subjects, or look into more books by that creator, or anything like that?
I'll safely just say this. Like, I don't think I actually read this before I read Invincible. I think I was reading, or maybe I was reading Walking Dead. So like back in the day, Image used to put these little inserts into all of their trades, and you would get this. I got this insert for The Walking Dead. I think I was reading, it said other books by Robert Kirkman, and it was Invincible and Battle Pope. And I remember I couldn't find Battle Pope anywhere. And so I ended up, I'll freely admit, I pirated this when I was in college, right? I bought the issues to read for this episode, you guys. I paid money for this comic book. But back in the day in college, I couldn't find it anywhere, so I pirated it because I didn't know where else to get it. And I just wanted to read more about Robert Kirkman. I wanted to read more of his books because I really, really liked what he was doing with The Walking Dead. Eventually I really, really liked his Invincible. So like, I just wanted to read more of the same creator.
I remember you reading Battle Pope in college.
I remember preaching the gospel of this book.
I remember that. I was just like, I'm not going to do that.
I know. Well, I remember, yeah, because I know when we first met, I was a bit of a shithead. I totally get that. I mean, like, there are jokes in this book that are just so weird. Like, it's all muscles and guns and cigars. At one point, Battle Pope sleeps with a what he calls satanic jailbait demon. Like, ugh. I don't know. Anyways, to answer Kate's question is like, it's basically, I wanted to read more Robert Kirkman, and it turns out that he did a book that edgy 18-year-old Mike thought was really fucking on the nose, really gonna piss off those Christians back in school, because that's the kind of kid that I was. Not anymore. I'm 32 now. I'm no longer 18. I've tried to grow.
It made me want to read the other books that were in the graphic novel preview that I had. It was really hard to find those books. But then also, like, after the last page, because like the end of the book ends with, or the end of the preview book ends with The Prince of Tennis, which was a series that I have tried to read multiple times, and it's a lot. It's pretty good. I do like it, but I don't think Prince of Tennis is one that you can marathon. It's intense. But the very next page after The Prince of Tennis ends is a little thing for Naruto. And at the time, I hadn't watched Naruto, I hadn't read Naruto, but I heard about it, kept hearing about it, and eventually I just kept seeing it in this preview book, and I was like, well, let's see what this little boy ninja's about. And then we never looked back.
I love that. What about you, Kate?
I feel like, well, okay, so first of all, I kind of didn't go anywhere after Sailor Moon immediately in terms of comics. I think that's kind of why I sort of forgot about it in my history with comic books, is I just doubled down on my love of Sailor Moon. I watched the anime, I read the mangas, I got the movies on VHS. I was getting all of these extra pieces of media related to this one single fandom, and that was it. Like, I did not pick up another comic book until I was pretty much in your house in college at one point. But I think that it did kind of open up my ability to accept comics as a medium, because especially, you know, in my very small little town that I grew up in, it was kind of like, oh, comics are just for kids and blah, 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 you know? So I think that it kind of paved the way for me to pick them up again later.
Right. What about you, Renee? I don't know if there's any more to like where you went for. I guess you already said you went to Naruto.
I went to Naruto after that, but like when I was a kid, I just had like these random comics that my brothers would get, and I've told stories like that before. Like there was this little comic book shop across the street from my middle school, and this was before I really got back into comics. But I would go over there just to see what comics they had. And if I had like $1 or $2 from like change in the couch or something like that, I would grab one. And I still remember one that I grabbed, and it was Spider-Man number 51, just another Manic Monday. It's excellent. The cover has fallen off now, but it was actually the first time.
Can't get that CGC graded.
What?
I said can't get that CGC graded.
Yeah. So but it was the first time I saw Francisco Herrera's art style, and I love it. But also, like, this series, I still remember so much about this comic, and like reading through it, I was like, oh yeah, I love the way that web is. There's a bunch of one-liners in the comic that I ended up using, you know, through my adolescence, like a tool.
Listen, you know what? When you're younger and you think something's cool, man, I totally get that.
But like, you know, there was always that desire to get back into comics. I think that was always there, that I always wanted. And I think just, you know, hitting that bug after getting that preview book, you know, some 5 or 6 years later, that just kind of pushed it over the edge that like, I can read more stuff. There's ways to get it. Like there wasn't Hoopla back then, but you know, there was libraries and random sales bins at grocery stores and stuff, and you know, there was like
the gas station that'll sell you 5 books for $5.
Yeah, you know, there were ways to do it, and if you had $3, you could buy a random comic book, and And again, like I even felt like really, I kept looking for previews books because I was like, you know what, this is at least a little sample of multiple things. And like I think I also bought like those. They had Shonen Jump magazine, the U.S. edition, where they just had like a handful of chapters from the most popular manga that had animes going on in the U.S. So I have a couple of those as well. But I think what was kind of going back through these comics was sort of realizing, you know, how my life has kind of changed. Because back then I was just kind of grasping at anything that either looked familiar or cool, whereas where now I can sort of explore and do different things. And I should probably do less of that because I'm running out of room in this room.
Yeah, Danny said earlier that he just imagines your room is just not beds or chairs or anything. It's just piles of books that you sit on and sleep on and stuff.
He's not far off because like there are books everywhere. There's like it's everywhere. Like my desk has a bookshelf in it, and that is overflowing. There's books on the desk on top of my books. There's a bookshelf. I've got books on top of my skate stuff. You know.
Yeah.
He's not far off.
Well, one of the things I realized going back to reading this, like this is kind of the last question, is like, how do you guys feel about these comics now that you've read them? And I just want to answer first in that saying that I realize that, you know, sometimes you read books and they're not all winners, but I think that is a lot of comic books, is that, you know, there are books that came out during a certain time period, right? Like 2000 was an interesting time for comics because Marvel had almost collapsed. DC was kind of just doing whatever they want. And Image was kind of on the precursor of the rise that became like the modern era of Image, right? And, you know, going back and revisiting this, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at how far I've come as a comic book reader. And like the kinds of things that I'm willing to put up with, the things that I recognize are not cool in comic books anymore. And you can say like, oh, this book is of a certain time. But even at the time, like there's definitely something kind of gross about this book that I should have picked up on it. Like, because there are books that come out today that are like intentionally super edgy and try to get out there, but they're being put out by like not huge publishers because I don't think people want to read that anymore. And the people that do want to read them, you kind of want to sequester them in a corner in some ways. And so I'm glad that I read this as a younger kid, because I think that I would have been, if this was one of the first books I picked up now, like say I hadn't read any comic books up until this point, I probably would have been super turned off by comic books because of how like childish and over the top this book is. Whereas not a lot of the comic books that we read nowadays, I feel like have a lot more nuance. Not to say they didn't have them back then, but like, you know, just the books that I was reading back then didn't have a lot of nuance. They were just in your face kind of action packed books. You know, early X-Men or X-Men from around the time, as well as like some of the Image books that I mentioned before. That doesn't make them all bad, because I still think Invincible is a pretty solid comic book, even despite its issues. I think the early, you know, first half of Walking Dead is a fantastic comic book. I really enjoyed reading that, but like there wasn't a lot of necessary like nuance or more to read into in some of those books. And Battle Pope, I think, is the worst committer of that, in that it's just in your face for the sake of being offensive. And there was a mentality that I had reading through that after I read through the first issue of just like, is this Robert Kirkman's like super hyper religious book where like he's intentionally showing all of the bad stuff of the world as like a switch around to like convince you to convert to whatever religion he has? And I haven't finished Battle Pope. I don't think I ever read all of it.
But will you?
But that was my no, absolutely not. I don't have time for that. But like the joke in my head was like, is this Robert Kirkman's way of like pulling the wool over your eyes to have like a big reveal at the end that you need to convert to whatever religion he's a part of? I don't know if that's the case. There's a lot of swears, a lot of sexual thingies in this book to make me believe that. But anyways, that was just my weird thought. But yeah, I guess like, how do you guys feel like now, having gone back revisiting these things?
For Sailor Moon, I can see both why my parents didn't want me watching it at the time, and and I can see why it had staying power enough to get additional translations. I think that there is, like I said, like the celebration of femininity, this big group of girls that have one another's backs. I feel like there's certain things that have happened since then in pop culture that have really pulled on Sailor Moon as inspiration, especially with the magical girl transformations.
Right. I mean, and so many people also cite this as like a serious inspiration for them to become a creator in some capacity, or they loved Sailor Moon as a kid, and that like was a driving force for them to want to create comics with that same kind of push for femininity and stuff.
Yeah. And now, I mean, I'm glad that comics and manga have exploded out and will have different subject matter and different like superpowers and other combinations of groups in them. Like, I'm glad that we have something other than this on the market, but I really did enjoy revisiting this, knowing that it was gonna be a little outdated.
Gotcha. What about you, Renee? Any final thoughts about going back and rereading books that you've said you've read a couple times already?
Yeah, because I think because I just kind of read them just because, one, they're the most easily accessible books because I do read them so often. But this time, like, kind of going back into like thinking or realizing that these are the books that kind of helped me get started or get back into comics, and sort of realizing where I went from that, like. Hikaru no Go really did kind of keep my interest in manga because I've told the story of like how I got the volume 4 of Dragon Ball Z from my cousin, but I had that for so many years and I didn't go explore other manga. But reading Hikaru no Go made me want to read other manga, and then it also introduced me to sort of non-battle manga, so it wasn't just always they have to be punching each other. Like there can be face-offs and that don't include battle in the
they could be punching each other in their minds.
Yeah, or on the go board.
On the go board.
And so like I guess I'm very appreciative of that. And then also I think the fact that like these were aimed at the age group that I was at the time. Because I think if I had tried reading series like Ubel, Blatt, or Berserk at that age, I don't think I would have continued to read manga. I think it would have scared.
Or you would have been that like. Yeah, you've been that kid in the trench coat, black nail polish and stuff, hanging out in the corner, not caring about nothing.
So I wanted to be that kid, but I wasn't that kid.
Right, because you hadn't read Berserk is the problem.
No, because my mom scared the crap out of me about being that kid.
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion. I'm glad that we were able to talk about it today, and I wasn't trying to bring the party down with my Battle Pope book, but guys, don't read Battle Pope. Just don't do it. So I guess to wrap things up, you can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Renee at Rodriguer29. You can follow Kate at Kate Elfier, and you can follow me at Mike Rappin, and the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram.
This podcast first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for exclusive series like the IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. Join now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast.
If you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps us spread the word about IRCB. And you can join the IRCB Discord community to chat about comics and more, and listen to our episodes live as we record at ircbpodcast.com/discord. And it would help us a lot if you tell your friends, your local comic book shop, and any of the people you talk to about the show, whether in person, online, or safely distanced.
We'd appreciate it. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music for the show. Xander is a cool guy who edits I Read Comic Books, and he's just a nice person to be around. I want to say thanks to Renee and Kate for being on this episode. Thanks to Danny for listening live with us, and everybody out there who listens to the show. We really, really appreciate you. Go check out Candy Bar Antler Boy. It's the coolest thing in the world. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.